You ever stop and wonder what keeps the entire world from just falling apart? Well, it turns out there's this invisible rule book, kind of like a global operating system, that dictates how nearly 200 countries are supposed to get along. So today, let's unpack this incredibly important and often really misunderstood system: international law. And probably the best place for us to start is with the central puzzle of international law, the one thing that makes it totally different from any law you and I deal with every day. And really, that whole puzzle comes down to this one question. Why do you always hear this global rulebook get called soft law? I mean, it just sounds kind of weak, doesn't it? Well, the simple answer is right here. There's no global police force to make countries actually follow the rules. And that's the core paradox we're going to dive into. How on earth can a law without a cop on the beat actually work? Okay, this slide really breaks it down. Over on the left, you've got traditional law, right? A government passes it, police enforce it. Simple. But international law, on the right, that's a whole different beast. It's built on the consensus of states, and there are no courts that can just drag a country in without its permission. It's a system built on agreement, not authority. So, keeping that paradox in mind, let's take a step back. What is this rule book actually for? What's its job? Here's the official definition for you. Public international law is basically the set of rules for how sovereign states deal with each other. Fun fact, the term was actually coined way back in 1780 by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. You can think of it as the law of nations. And it's super important to make this distinction. We're talking about public law on the left, how countries interact. Private law, over on the right, is something else entirely. It deals with messy disputes between regular people from different countries, like, say, a custody battle that crosses borders. Really important stuff, but not what we're focused on today. And the job description here is, well, huge. This system is the framework we use to try and keep the peace, to protect borders, and to tackle massive global problems like climate change that no single country could ever solve on its own. It's the foundation that allows for stability in our very interconnected world. So that brings up a pretty big question, right? If there's no world government, where do these rules actually come from? Who's writing them? And this is the key thing to get your head around. You have to forget any idea of a big global parliament passing laws for everyone. It just doesn't exist. Making international law is a much more decentralized and, frankly, messier process that's driven by the countries themselves. So, if we want to find the rules, where do we look? Well, the main guide is Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. It lays out the primary sources. You've got formal agreements, called treaties, unwritten rules, known as customs, and a few others that help fill in the gaps. Now, the two heavy hitters here are treaties and customary law. You can see on the table, a treaty is like a written contract. It's based on an express agreement, and you're only bound by it if you sign on the dotted line. Customary law is more like an unwritten rule that just emerges over time from how states behave, and eventually it becomes binding on everyone. Both of them are the absolute backbone of the system. And this is just a perfect example of that customary law in action. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That wasn't a treaty. Nobody signed it like a contract. But over decades, its ideas became so widely accepted and practiced by states that it's now considered binding customary law for everybody. Powerful stuff. Okay, so this all leads to a massive question, maybe the biggest one of all. What happens when one of these global rules clashes with a country's own domestic laws? Who wins that fight? Well, there are two main ways to think about this. The monist view on the left sees all law as one big unified system. International law can just flow directly into national law and can even be superior. The dualist view, though, sees them as two totally separate systems. For an international rule to work domestically, the country has to pass its own law to basically copy it into the national rulebook. So here's a real-world example from Nepal's Treaty Act. And you don't have to read all the legalese. The main point is that this is pure monism. It flat out says that if a treaty they've ratified conflicts with their own national laws, the treaty wins. Period. But then, get this, the very next paragraph of the exact same law takes a dualist approach. For other types of treaties, it says new domestic laws have to be passed to make them work. This just goes to show you that in the real world, it's not one or the other. A lot of countries have this kind of messy, mixed system. Okay, let's pull all these threads together.
We started with this puzzle about soft law. Now that we have all the pieces, we can finally see why this system, even with its apparent weaknesses, actually matters so much.
When you boil it all down, it comes back to one word: consent. The entire system, the whole shebang, is built on the idea that countries agree to be bound by the rules. This is both its greatest strength because it respects their independence and its biggest challenge. You can't force a country to play the game. And of course, politics and power are a huge part of this. The realist view basically says that international law is just whatever the most powerful countries say it is. But the liberal view argues that institutions and shared values do matter, and they make the world more predictable and cooperative for everyone. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So let's just be really clear about the weaknesses we've talked about. There's no world parliament, there are no courts that can force a country to show up, there's no international police. And, crucially, any real enforcement action at the UN can be stopped dead by a single veto from one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council.
But, and this is the really wild part, despite all of those limitations, study after study shows that states obey international law more than 95% of the time. Just think about that for a second. Why would they do that? Well, because it's in almost everyone's best interest to live in a stable, predictable world.
And that's why this soft law matters so much. It's the hard framework for nearly everything that crosses a border: your mail, your flights, global trade, environmental agreements, even the very idea of human rights. Our modern connected world literally could not function without it. Which leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. In a world full of powerful, independent countries that are fiercely protective of their own sovereignty, maybe a system that's built on consent instead of force is the only kind of global rulebook that could ever really work in the first place. It's a heck of a question to think about.